It's like
Fox and Friends.
Fox and Friends.
One of their guests. Oh, it's going to be bad. All right, Donna.
Baby, first of all, the day I start stealing, the last thing I want is a mug, okay? I got a lot of those myself. In fact, I'll bring you one next time I'm here. Well, this is a great story because Chadwick Boseman, who, a great actor, Wakanda Forever, Black Panthers, remember that?
Didn't see that one.
Okay, well, it's on Netflix. Anyway, he just received a wonderful award from MTV for Movie and TV Award. And guess what he did? Check this out. He gave his award to James Shaw Jr., the young man who wrestled that gunman down in Antioch, Tennessee at the Waffle House. He gave his award to Mr. Shaw.
That's great.
Kudos, Chadwick, for recognizing this wonderful young man. And thank you, James Shaw. You are a real hero.
All right, set your DVRs. Never miss an episode. Who needs wherewithal when you have Bret at the Capitol? Hey, Bret.
Bear with all. Thanks, Greg.
Yeah, I told you.
Good evening, I'm Bret Baier. This is a Fox News Alert. We are live tonight on Capitol Hill, where the fight over the president's zero-tolerance immigration policy, its effect on children, and the Republican effort at a reform bill sharing a very crowded center stage. President Trump is right now here on Capitol Hill, meeting with House Republicans about one floor down, not far from where we're standing. It comes as many of his fellow Republicans are demanding an end to what has become a public relations nightmare just months before the midterm elections. We have Fox team coverage tonight. John Roberts at the White House with what the president is saying and doing about all of this. But we start off with Chief Congressional Correspondent Mike Emanuel here on Capitol Hill with me. With the latest on this afternoon's big meeting, we are keeping an eye on that meeting, the doors, and when the president speaks, he's expected to speak after that meeting. We'll bring you those remarks. Busy day up here, Mike. Good evening.
Good evening to you. No question about it. President Trump pushing House Republicans to get this done, pass an immigration reform plan this week. Fox has learned that this compromise bill that the House leadership has crafted would take steps to address the parent and child being separated at the border issue, what's become the critical topic here on Capitol Hill.
If you happen to be a poor person, we're going to yank that baby out of the mother's arms.
Democrats blasting President Trump and his administration for blaming Congress over parents being separated from their children.
Well, that's just a load of crap. I mean, really, it's just wrong. I mean, give me a break. Everybody knows that. And this is not a time for lying, mendacity. It's a time for being honorable.
Senate Republican leaders are hopeful they can address that one narrow issue as soon as this week.
We're going to fix the problem. The president says we need to act. The Democrats say we need to act, and we say we need to act. So when that happens, we act.
Yet the Senate Democratic leader says the president should handle it.
Mr. President, I'll lend you my pen. Any pen. You can fix it yourself.
Republican Senator Orrin Hatch is circulating a letter among his colleagues calling for a pause on family separations until Congress has time to pass a legislative fix. Hatch argues families should not have to suffer while Congress takes the time to get this done right. Border state Republicans say the answer is handling the families in a sympathetic way.
What we need to do is enforce the law, but to do so in a way that keeps families together and is a humane and compassionate way to deal with what is admittedly a complex problem. But not enforcing the law is not an option, at least for me.
On that front, there's at least some bipartisan agreement.
If you detain him as a family unit. If you send one back, you send them all back.
But the Senate Judiciary Chairman says President Trump must be on board with any legislative fix on immigration.
The leader will not bring up any immigration bills that the administration is not committed to signing. So even if we got 60 votes and the president won't sign it, I don't think it's going to come up.
Even in unrelated hearings, this issue remains the dominant topic.
Are you not shaken by the voices and faces of these children torn away from their families?
Of course I am, but I'm also shaken by the stories I hear about parents dragging their little kids through the desert.
Are you aware of
through cartel-controlled territory?
There's also a political component which could put Democrats up for re-election in red states in jeopardy. All Senate Democrats have signed on to a bill offered by California's Dianne Feinstein, who admits it would not allow arrests within 100 miles of the border.
If that bothers Susan, we'll take it out. That's easy.
And in a House oversight hearing, the panel's top Democrat made this emotional appeal.
We need you to join us in telling him
that we reject this mean policy.
The timing of all this heading into midterm campaign season makes it a red-hot political issue, and Bret, as you know, not easy to solve.
Right, and just back to that Feinstein bill, I mean, it doesn't really have a chance of getting through, but politically for Joe Donnelly of Indiana and Heidi Heitkamp and John Tester and all of these red state Democrats who are up for re-election to sign on to that bill, that's potentially politically jeopardizing.
No question about it. I've talked to Republican sources who say they think these Democrat senators were looking for an exit ramp from this issue. They grabbed the first thing they could find and didn't read the fine print. And it'll be interesting to see how much this is played over and over again going into November.
In those races. Mike, thanks.
Thank you.
Now to the White House, where President Trump was earlier today railing against a Democratic plan he says would infest the U.S. with illegal immigrants who would vote against Republicans. The president's words. Chief White House correspondent John Roberts is there again on the North Lawn. Good evening, John.
Good evening to you, Bret. And the president will spend his time up there on Capitol Hill twisting arms in support of the two immigration bills that are there before the House, talking with Republicans tonight about the importance of getting at least one of those measures through. Officially, the White House supports both of them, but the compromise bill is the one that they would more likely like to see passed. The president saying that these bills, or at least one of them, are needed to end the crisis of families being separated on the border.
President Trump will need all of his deal-making skills to pull this one off, leveraging the horribly unpopular idea of separating children from their parents at the border in order to get Congress to move on immigration reform.
As a result of Democrat-supported loopholes in our federal laws, most illegal immigrant families and minors from Central America who arrive unlawfully at the border cannot be detained together.
The president is blaming Democrats, but it was his administration's decision to invoke a zero-tolerance policy at the border. President Trump insisting that years of previous White Houses not enforcing the law has had a profoundly detrimental effect on the nation.
Roughly 500,000 illegal immigrant family units and minors from Central America have been released into the United States since 2014 at unbelievably great taxpayer expense.
The president is pushing Congress to make changes to the law to allow children to stay with their parents during the prosecution and deportation process. He also wants a $25 billion commitment to build a border wall and broader immigration reforms.
We want them to come in through the process, through the legal system, and we want ultimately a merit-based system where people come in based on merit.
In a conference call this morning, officials from Homeland Security and Health and Human Services said 2,342 children have been separated from their parents in the month between May 5th and June 9th. They insisted that children are being well cared for, but they contradicted the DHS secretary, who said yesterday the zero-tolerance policy was not adopted to discourage illegal immigration.
We expect that the new policy will result in a deterrence effect. We certainly hope that parents stop bringing their kids on this dangerous journey and entering the country illegally.
Only 21 of the children removed from their parents are Mexican, but the zero-tolerance policy drew an official response from Mexico's Foreign Relations Secretary today, Luis Videgaray, calling it cruel and inhumane. President Trump firing back that Mexico is only too quick to allow migrants from Central America to pass through Mexico as long as they are bound for the United States.
Mexico does nothing for us. You hear it here. They do nothing for us. They could stop it. They have very, very strong laws. Try staying in Mexico for a couple of days. See how long that lasts. Okay?
The majority of families subject to separation are from Honduras, Guatemala, and El Salvador. President Trump today said in that same speech that he is soon going to go to Congress for authorization to withhold U.S. aid from countries that don't take steps to curb the flow of illegal migrants. Bret?
John, the White House also had an announcement on health care today. What about that?
Yeah, and this was one that was quite well received by the National Federation of Independent Business, the body to which the president was speaking, saying that he is taking steps to authorize small businesses to band together into health care associations, which will allow them the purchasing power of numbers to buy health insurance at much lower costs. Listen here.
For the first time ever, sole proprietors will be able to come together and buy lower cost group insurance instead of getting ripped off by this disaster that we all know as Obamacare.
While small businesses seem to appreciate the effort, there are critics who say that this is going to lead to substandard health coverage for people who are in sole proprietorships or small businesses and only seek to further weaken Obamacare. Bret?
We'll follow all of that. John, thank you. The administration is getting pressure from virtually all sides tonight to end the practice of separating children from their parents at the border. National correspondent William Lajeunesse is in San Diego again tonight.
We are going to end catch and release.
From the campaign trail to the Oval Office, Trump's rhetoric on immigration always seemed like a winner, but now even his supporters say he's gone too far.
No one wants to see families separated. I think President Trump said he doesn't want to see families separated.
See or hear. Most Republicans support Trump in reforming asylum laws and increasing interior enforcement. But when it comes to actually ending catch and release, which in this case means separating and detaining children apart from their parents, pictures and sound of them crying out is political dynamite.
I have not talked to a single person who's looked at those images and said, well, it's necessary. That's the only way we're going to succeed in, slowing down the inflow of immigrants.
Republicans, even immigration hawks who've complained for years about lax enforcement, abandon the president on this issue.
We have zero tolerance for anything that separates families, right? And so clearly Utah has strong feelings about this.
This practice that is happening currently at the border is inhumane, and we wish that it is stopped.
More than 10,000 clergy signed a letter urging the White House to back down. The Church of Latter-day Saints said they are deeply troubled by the zero-tolerance policy. Across the country, rallies against Trump. The governors of Massachusetts and New York will no longer send their National Guard to the border. Today, the governor of Virginia recalled his. Utah's governor called the policy inhumane, while in Colorado, no state funds can be used to shelter immigrants.
The amount of trauma that these people have endured is unspeakable. And to make them go through that even more is just actually the worst thing I could imagine.
While the administration blames Democrats, two new polls show that many voters blame the president. About 70%, Bret, oppose this child policy. And as you well know, when polls talk, politicians listen. Bret?
William Lajeunesse, let me tell you, we're hearing all kinds of things from different folks, but what are the Border Patrol agents telling you? How do they feel about all this?
One thing, they want to see consequences. They want to see someone send a message. If you come here illegally, you break the law, they want to see there's some consequences. Otherwise, there's no disincentive for the next person not to try the same thing. Bret?
William, thank you. Up next, new trade tensions between the U.S. and China sends world markets into a nosedive. So is this the beginning of a full-scale trade war? We'll look at that. First, here's what some of our Fox affiliates around the country are covering tonight. Fox 2 in Detroit has more than 120 sexual assault victims of former sports doctor Larry Nassar demand that Michigan State University's governing board remove interim school president John Engler. They say Engler has reinforced, quote, the culture of abuse at MSU. Engler is a former two-term Republican governor of Michigan. Fox 9 in the Twin Cities as a dam break on the Tamarack River causes flash flooding along the Minnesota-Wisconsin border. One person has already died in the flooding in northern Wisconsin. The 75-year-old man's body was found 60 feet from his pickup, which had been swept off the road into a ditch. And this is a live look at St. Louis from our affiliate, Fox 2. The big story there tonight, the Missouri Democratic Party is suing to block the appointment of Mike Kehoe as lieutenant governor. The suit reopens a long-standing legal debate over whether the governor has the power to appoint someone to the second-ranking executive position. The lieutenant governor's office was vacated June 1st when Republican Mike Parson became governor after the resignation of Eric Greitens. That's tonight's live look outside the Beltway from Special Report. Back here inside the Beltway, we continue to watch those doors outside the immigration meeting with Republicans and President Trump. We're told Speaker Ryan opened up the meeting. And now they're talking. When they come to the microphone, and there is one set up, we will bring it to you live here on Fox. Stay tuned. still meeting behind closed doors. You see there with the Republican House members about immigration. Staffers have just brought out that microphone, and when the president speaks to reporters, we will bring it to you live here on Fox. Financial markets all over the world cratered earlier today upon word that President Trump is threatening another $200 billion on imported Chinese products. China immediately threatened to retaliate on those tariffs. Wall Street, the Dow was down 400 points at one juncture before closing off 287. The S&P 500 dropped 11. The Nasdaq was down 21. While President Trump insists he is trying to level the international trading field, China calls his latest move blackmail. Correspondent Rich Edson has more tonight from the State Department.
The Trump administration promises a second round of tariffs against Chinese imports and is threatening a third. Global markets dropped with losses across Asia, Europe, and the United States. The president contends he's correcting a structural problem in U.S. trade policy.
You see what's happening with China. We have no choice. This should have been done many years ago.
The president has directed the United States Trade Representative to identify $200 billion in Chinese imports and apply a tariff of 10%. If China retaliates, he says his administration will raise tariffs on an additional $200 billion in Chinese goods. That's on top of the tariffs it implemented last week on $50 billion in Chinese imports. China retaliated and says it is not afraid of a trade war with the U.S.
We advise the U.S. to remain rational and stop such words and moves that harm itself and others. This is the only viable way out.
The Trump administration has also enacted tariffs on global steel and aluminum imports. Russia announced today it will soon release a list of American products to target with tariffs. Even American allies say they'll retaliate. Still, the State Department claims arguments over trade will not affect other aspects of international relationships.
It would encourage you not to conflate the two issues because we have complex relationships with so many countries around the world where we have things that we are in total disagreement over, and then we have areas where we are still working to develop better agreement over those issues.
Some analysts disagree, especially on China and its involvement with North Korea.
They're not without leverage on this. Why imposing tariffs on them will make them more cooperative, I don't see.
And less than a week after the Singapore summit, North Korean dictator Kim Jong-un is in China again, his third trip there to meet with President Xi Jinping. The State Department says the United States and North Korea have continued conversations since last week's summit in Singapore, and now two U.S. defense officials say North Korea is expected to transfer the remains of 200 U.S. service members killed during the Korean War and will do so to UN command in South Korea. That, of course, was announced by President Trump last week at that summit. Bret?
Interesting, that third trip by Kim to China. Rich, the Trump administration now announcing the departure from the United Nations main human rights body. Why?
It is, calling it a shameless defender of hypocrisy. The Secretary of State, Mike Pompeo, joining UN Ambassador Nikki Haley here at the State Department about an hour ago, saying that it had given the UN Human Rights Council a year to reform itself. It failed to do so, so the U.S. is leaving.
We take this step because our commitment does not allow us to remain a part of a hypocritical and self-serving organization that makes a mockery of human rights. We could have withdrawn immediately. We did not do that. Instead, we made a good faith effort to resolve the problems.
Secretary Pompeo says the council has membership on it of some of the worst human rights defenders, singling out China, Cuba, and Venezuela, while it obsessively mistreats Israel and lets other violators go. The Democratic Senator Chris Coons said that it's a mistake for the United States to leave and that it's better to be part of the conversation. Bret?
Rich Edson live at the State Department. Rich, thank you. A big change coming to a couple of iconic American institutions. General Electric, an original member of the Dow Jones Industrials, is to be removed from the index. GE will be replaced by Walgreens. Up next, did the FBI bias during the Clinton email investigation bleed over into the Russia collusion probe? We'll look into that. First, beyond our borders tonight, the UN Refugee Agency says nearly 69 million people who have fled war, violence, and persecution are classified as forcibly displaced. Turkey is the country with the most refugees. The U.S. received the most new applications for asylum. The leaders of Germany and France are meeting to coordinate their positions on the future of the European Union. The meeting comes ahead of next week's EU summit. German Chancellor Angela Merkel is facing demands from within her own conservative bloc to turn back some migrants at Germany's borders. She's seeking agreement with other European leaders. And in London, family members joined community leaders for a moment of silence to remember a father of 6 who died 1 year ago today when a jobless man drove his van into a crowd, leaving evening prayers during Ramadan. A dozen other people were hurt then. Prosecutors say the driver was motivated by a hatred of Muslims. Just some of the other stories beyond our borders tonight. Here on Capitol Hill, we are still watching the stakeout cameras outside that immigration meeting still ongoing between House Republicans and President Trump. When it breaks, we'll bring it to you here. You're looking live here on Capitol Hill, just outside an ongoing immigration meeting between House Republicans and President Trump. We're told it is going now in a Q&A session back and forth. We'll go there live when it breaks up, when the president is expected to speak to reporters there at that microphone. It was another day of some pretty intense questioning for the Justice Department Inspector General today. At issue, what part politics and prejudice played in the FBI's investigation of the Hillary Clinton email scandal and, by extension, the ongoing probe into Russia election interference. Chief Intelligence Correspondent Catherine Herridge is watching it all here from Capitol Hill.
They prejudged the outcome of the Hillary Clinton investigation before the investigation ended, and these exact same FBI agents and attorneys prejudged the outcome of the Russia investigation before it even began.
During a second day of marathon testimony, lawmakers pressed Inspector General Michael E. Horowitz over what Republicans describe as political bias at the FBI impacting both presidential campaigns. They point to a newly discovered August 2016 text between FBI agent Peter Strzok and FBI lawyer Lisa Page saying they would stop Trump from being elected.
I wonder who the we is and the we'll stop it. If we can go through a couple of them.
Or the or a broader group. Beyond that, we have found 3 additional FBI agents.
And some transition to the Russia Special Counsel investigation.
Do they still work for Mueller? That's my understanding is no.
In July 2016, Agent Strzok also pivoted from the Clinton emails to collusion.
Do you believe the political bias shown by this text had an effect on the initiation of the Russia investigation?
That's a matter we've got under review.
Horowitz testified a 4th forensic review of the Strzok-Page FBI phones uncovered the explosive text in May. Congress wasn't immediately notified.
We sent it to the Office of Deputy Attorney General and
So Mr. Rosenstein,
in his office.
The point is, when you did get it, Mr. Rosenstein decided we couldn't get it until your report came out. He sat on it for a month of time.
Another lawmaker questioned why the report was silent on allegations the Clinton server may have been hacked, and the FBI failed to follow up.
But that's not in your report. That's correct.
The president weighed in.
When you read that IG report about how she got away with what she got away with, it's a disgrace.
After multiple reviews in an FBI investigation, Democrats blame former Director James Comey and accused Republicans of refusing to acknowledge that a Clinton prosecution was never justified.
All their howling about lock her up was bogus. It was baseless. It was unsubstantiated.
James Comey decided to play judge, jury, and executioner, and on October 28th, he executed the Hillary Clinton campaign.
The hearing concluded after 6.5 hours of testimony with headlines in the final minutes. Inspector General Horowitz confirmed that he's following up on allegations that FBI interview summaries known as 302s were altered. Bret.
Catherine, there was also some late news this afternoon on FBI agent Peter Strzok. What did we learn there?
Well, in a statement, Strzok's attorney confirmed to Fox News that his client has been fully cooperating with an internal FBI review, which included recently being escorted from the FBI building. The statement also said, at least for now, Strzok remains an FBI employee. Bret.
Okay, Catherine, thank you. The president took time out today from immigration and investigation talk to mark a landmark in American innovation. He signed the 10 millionth patent It is issued to defense contractor Raytheon for a device invented by one of its employees. The patent is for a type of laser-based object detection used in industries such as autonomous vehicles, medical imaging, and space, as also undersea exploration. As we said, we're still waiting for the end of that meeting, still ongoing as the Q&A continues with the president and House Republicans over basically the zero-tolerance immigration policy. That's intensifying. The president started, we're told, by saying don't worry about the trade issues with China when he started this meeting. We'll get reaction from the panel on all of this when we come back.
The immigration system, it's been a really bad system, probably the worst anywhere in the world. We're going to try and see if we can fix it. Most illegal immigrant families and minors from Central America who arrive unlawfully at the border cannot be detained together or removed together, only released. Give us a third option, which we have been requesting since last year, the legal authority to detain and promptly remove families together as a unit.
The president alone can fix it with this flick of a pen by signing a presidential order to end the agonizing screams of small children.
Well, it's all the talk up here on Capitol Hill. You're looking live outside that meeting. A few people breaking away from the meeting. We expect it to come to an end very soon. When it does, you'll see it here if they talk about this. You heard the Senate Minority Leader Chuck Schumer say today that Democrats were not going to sign on to any Republican piece of legislation, even a narrow fix on this very issue, saying there could be poison pills in it, and saying and conceding they want to keep the pressure on President Trump, who, as he said, could solve it with a flick of the pen. Let's bring in our panel. Jonah Goldberg, senior editor at National Review, A.B. Stoddard, associate editor at Real Clear Politics, and Steve Hilton is a former advisor to British Prime Minister David Cameron. He's also the host of The Next Revolution here on Fox News Channel. A.B., clearly both sides are positioning here, and when Schumer concedes that Democrats are not signing on to any piece of legislation, even if it moves this week, it's pretty telling.
Right, that's a mistake, obviously. There are about 12 senators, I think there might be more by now, a bipartisan list, imploring the Trump administration to do that, to end the policy on their own without legislation. But if the Congress is willing to sort of give cover to the president and pass legislation, Democrats, if it's going to be narrow and it's going to be, the president's asking for a kitchen sink, as you know, he doesn't want piecemeal, he wants the whole thing. If they're willing, Republicans, to go out and defy him and pass a one-paragraph bill, Democrats are going to need to vote for that. The president needs to stop lying about this. This policy needs to end. These families can be deported or detained together, but they should remain as a unit. And if the Republicans are smart, they will really urge the president in this meeting, who apparently is talking about other things, to end this as soon as possible.
You just saw Mark Meadows, congressman from North Carolina, coming out there talking briefly to the reporters. It means that this is probably breaking up pretty soon. Steve, it's pretty sad, the whole images and what we're hearing from the border, but it's also sad that Washington can't get its head around how to fix it quickly. Obviously, the president can do what he can do, but Congress can do it too.
You're right, Bret. I mean, it's worse than sad. It's horrifying to see what's going on, but it's not enough to be horrified. We actually need to try and sort the problem out, because this immigration system has been creaking under strain for decades now. So in the short term, you've got to have this fixed. And I think there must be a way to keep the zero tolerance policy, but to stop the family separation. That's what needs to be passed. But in the longer term, and by that I don't mean years, I mean months, they really need to ramp up the resources and really overhaul the whole system. So the Ted Cruz bill, I thought, was a good start there. More resources, more officials, more judges there, beefing up the court so that you can handle people's claims quickly, and exactly as AB says, deport them if they're going to be deported together. That's what needs to happen. And I think the crisis that's going on has just been building for years. This migration issue is just one of the biggest problems facing governments all over the world. You see it in Europe too, and our response has just been completely inadequate.
So Democrats finding the camera ahead of the Republican meeting breaking up. Jonah.
Yeah, I have to say I'm actually pretty grateful to Chuck Schumer, because it's nice to know that Washington on a bipartisan basis is living down to my expectations. You know, this White House has handled this issue in terms of messaging and politics about as badly as I've seen any issue be handled. You have some cabinet secretaries bragging about how this is their preferred policy, this is their choice. You have President Trump saying, no, 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 this is the Democrats doing this. You have the head of DHS taking offense at the suggestion that this would be the policy of the White House. And this almost at the same time that you have the Attorney General saying that this has been their plan all along and they're bragging about it. It is, whatever you think about the moral horror at the border, just as a messaging issue, this has been a hot mess. So it's great to see that the Democrats are coming forward and saying, no, 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 we don't want to actually do anything that would solve the problem. We want to focus on Trump at all times.
Okay, Jonah, panel, stand by if you would. Mark Meadows just walking out, joining us. Congressman, thanks for being here.
It's great to be with you.
Give us an inside scoop. We're kind of behind the scenes of this meeting.
You know, obviously it was a very long meeting where the president was talking about not only the agenda on immigration, but certainly what we've accomplished, what we need to do from here. But it's all about getting it done. He really wants us to make sure that we put up 218 votes on the House floor this week. He said he's behind us 1,000%. Obviously wants to deal with this separation issue with children at the border, but both bills actually do that. The compromise bill or the leadership bill is certainly the one that seems to have the most the highest probability of getting to 218.
The president just walked by. The microphone didn't stop. A number of Democrats there chanting about getting families together. Did the president say, you know, that he knows that he can do a change himself, or how did he play it with the legislation?
Yeah, no, he didn't do that. He had Secretary Nielsen there, and obviously she was there in the room and talking about the fact that we've got to find a real solution to this. But this is more a legislative solution. This is something that we've been dealing with a long time. When you look at protection of children, that's why this decree came down originally. But they believe that it's best that we get a legislative solution. I think there's some narrow bills that both in the House and the Senate that will address this issue. But I'm hearing Chuck Schumer is not supportive of any legislative effort.
We just reported that, and that's what he said today to reporters, is that there's not a Republican legislative solution that Democrats will sign on to. And your reaction to that?
Well, my reaction to that is read the bills. I mean, I know we've introduced a bill. Senator Ted Cruz has introduced a bill, but is he saying that there's no legislative solution? And when you look at that, Bret, I think the American people want us to solve it. I've been getting calls all day long, but at the same time, they want us to come together. Democrats and Republicans, I think a number of us are giving them the opportunity to do that.
I want to listen in, just see if the president says anything as he's with
Sure.
the House Majority Leader McCarthy.
Mr. President. These are laws that have been broken for many years, decades, but we had a great meeting. Thank you.
Kind of reiterating there, Congressman, what he said going in, the laws have been broken for decades, and you had a great meeting. Did he talk a lot about immigration, or was it a mix? I mean,
it was a real mix. I think he started with immigration. He came back to immigration both in the middle and at the end. But we talked about regulation. We talked about actually the association health plans to bring down premiums for health care that he's signing in with the Secretary of Labor. And
is there an urgency here, or is this an issue that both sides are kind of playing politics with?
Yeah, I can tell you that our side is not playing politics with it. I had my staff working over the weekend to come up with a legislative fix, 77 pages that really we worked around the clock to get introduced today, and we did that at noon. And so it's not about politics. It's about getting the job done right. Unfortunately, it has been a political football back and forth. And when you're dealing with people's lives, you got to make sure that you get it done right. Hopefully we will, and I believe we will this week.
And were Republicans in that meeting saying we need to either do a narrow bill, or, President, you have to change this dynamic?
Yeah, I think right now the focus was on the two more comprehensive bills. There was not a lot of discussion about a narrow bill, although the separation issue did come up a couple of times, and you know, the president was very compassionate about it, talked about his daughter bringing that up, Ivanka, and so when you look at that, it's not lost on him that we we've got to fix this, but at the same time, we've got this full week. I think the pressure is on us from the American people to get it done this week. I believe we will.
Congressman, we appreciate you stopping by,
Thank you,
giving
Bret.
us the inside scoop. AB, your thoughts on all of this?
Well, Bret, it's going to be a huge challenge to get either the Goodlatte bill or the sort of so-called moderate leadership bill over the finishing line in the House, even though both have now been reworked to include provisions to stop the separation of families. So we're looking over at the Senate side, where you have the majority leader really, creating a united front, saying we're all, in support of some kind of very narrow legislation. He said we cannot fix it all, that just deals with this separation issue. So different response from different chambers. The Republicans are under a lot of pressure to get this. If the president does not do this administratively, which we all know he can with one phone call, the Congress really needs to fix this and fix it fast as they look at the elections on November 6th.
But Steve, I mean, inside those sound bites, inside what you just heard Congressman Meadows say, inside what Senator Schumer is saying, is that this is a political leverage tool that both sides are seeing upside for fighting this battle.
It's ridiculous. It makes people so angry, rightly so. Look, the compromise bill, as it's described, which, as AB says, it does address the immediate emergency. That's something that includes measures that were on the table from Chuck Schumer a while back, and the changes that they've made are pretty reasonable. I just can't understand why. Look, there is a consensus that can't pass. I hear that. I'm sure that's correct. That's a correct assessment of where we are. But why can't it pass? People want something done about it, and that, I think, is a reasonable compromise.
Last word on this, Jonah, before we hit break.
Yeah, I mean, it's worth pointing out that one of the reasons why Democrats have hardened is they want to support Dianne Feinstein's bill, and Dianne Feinstein's bill is insane in its provisions about what it would do, and it suggests that the Democrats are still bought into this idea that they can bet on this demographic wave, and they don't want to let go of these issues. At the same time, the Republicans are in real trouble. This issue splits the Republican Party at a moment that the blue wave seemed to be dissipating. The economy was going gangbusters, and it looked like the Republicans could even hold on to the House. All of a sudden, this puts all of that in doubt. It is a precarious situation.
It's precarious for both sides. As I pointed out with Mike Emanuel, those red state Democrats who signed on to Feinstein's bill, which says you can't arrest any illegal immigrants within 100 miles of the border, I guarantee you that will be in an ad somewhere in a red state by a Republican. Next up, from border war to a possible trade war, we'll bring the panel on that.
You see what's happening with China. We have no choice. This should have been done many years ago. We have no choice.
It's the most predatory economic government that operates against the rest of the world today.
We want to have a constructive relationship with the government of China. In order to do that, we need to repair, make some progress on some issues related to trade.
We advise the U.S. to remain rational and stop such wars to harm itself and others. This is the only viable way out.
Well, the threat of $200 billion of additional tariffs against China sent the markets reeling, not only here, but around the world, especially in Asia. You see the Dow there dropping 400 points in intraday trading, down 270 at the end. But it did make things rocky, and there were a lot of people here on Capitol Hill weighing in on all sides. We're back with the panel. Jonah, what about this strategy, and can the president and the administration force China to buckle on this?
I'm pretty skeptical. I mean, China has a long history of China has a much bigger nationalism problem than almost anything else, and the idea of investing their national pride and being seen as losing face to the West or to the Americans, I think, is a real problem politically. But also, it's worth pointing out that the Dow is down, is now negative for the year. The Dow used to be the administration's favorite talking point about the indicator of how well things are going. They now point to better ones like unemployment and whatnot. But these things, trade wars are not easy to win. They're very hard to end. And right now, steel prices in the United States are already up 40%. We have a lot more people who are employed by firms that use steel than make them, and this could go south very quickly, and it makes me very nervous.
The trade representative Lighthizer is running point on this, but Peter Navarro, senior advisor to the president on this. Take a listen.
What we need for the American people,
is an enforceable, accountable, systematic change, structural in nature, so that we can have free, fair, and balanced trade, not just with China, but with the rest of the world. And we are looking forward to that day, but that is not this day.
I've never been a big fan of Peter Navarro. So the president himself kind of goes along with it. And I think the president's got to wake up and realize that's not the way to go.
Now, there's a lot of people, Steve, who say this is just shaky ground here. They don't know, as Jonah said, how it's going. There's others who say that this needs to be shaken up in the world order of things.
Yeah, and I'm one of them. I think Orrin Hatch is the one that needs to wake up. Look, he and the other members of the consensus that's been building around China for, ever since the late 90s, that we need to engage with them and be open and all the rest of it, and that will improve their behavior. They've just been proved to be completely wrong. Ever since we've been engaging economically with China, their behavior has got more and more authoritarian. They have set out clearly a plan for world domination. That's the language they use, economically, militarily. They have a plan to beat us. We need a plan to beat them. I think it's great that we're finally standing up to them, but frankly, I don't think these measures go far enough. I would say we need a complete economic boycott of China. That is the only way to face down this threat, because if the world is run according to the values of the authoritarian communist dictatorship led by President for Life Xi Jinping, that is not a world that we want.
Steve, what happens to all of the companies that do business with China, all of the workers who would feel it on the back end?
I've heard this argument, so I made this argument when I was working in 10 Downing Street. I'm very familiar with it. There is a whole world of opportunity beyond China. There is Africa, South America, India, the greatest democracy. That's where we should be putting our priority. The suck up to China that's been going on for so long has been a complete disaster, and we need to reverse it.
All right, AB, how does this play politically? Obviously, it is strange bedfellows here. You have some Democrats applauding all of these moves, including Senator Schumer.
Right. You have Democrats also like Sherrod Brown in Ohio, who is up with a 14-point lead, owning the tariffs, saying he's been in the Bernie Sanders wing on the far left, in unison with Trump on this for a long time. But you have other Republicans in states with farmers. I read yesterday that the hit to soybean farmers in Iowa alone will exceed $600 million. All the planning has to happen now. So whether or not we can determine, or the market can determine, or the poor Republican congressman running for re-election can determine what Trump is really going to finally do, all of the planning is taking place now. Disruption is already underway domestically and internationally, flows through ports, people planning for their inventory, prices, supplies, all of that is rippling out. And the poor members of Congress who think that they're going to get an answer from President Trump on whether it's just a tactic or it's definitely a trade war that's going to be easy to win, are going to be sitting around waiting to see the market response and the voter response. Right. And it's really scaring them. They won't bring it up with him. But as you know, because you're up there today, Bret, it's all the talk behind closed doors.
Well, he brought it up first. That's what he started with in this meeting, apparently. Very quickly, Jonah, tangentially, you have China working on the North Korea issue, whether they're helping or not, and that factors in as well.
It does, and that's one of the questions that we just don't know. I mean, it is in China's interest and North Korea's interest to run out the clock as long as possible on these negotiations, which I think is what China wants to do. I think that North Korea is still essentially an unruly vassal state of China, and how you negotiate this trade war stuff while at the same time figuring out how you keep North Korea on the path to this alleged denuclearization seems to me it's very tricky. I can't quite parse it.
Panel, thank you very much for rolling with the punches tonight. When we come back, a couple of very special reunions.